All right. So in my talk, there are two stories interlinked, like phases of a phase. So one phase is my own life, my phase, and the other is the phase of the sun. So the sun goes through different phases. It's sometimes very quiet and sometimes very active. So that's why I wanted to talk about my interactions with the sun, which I could describe as a love affair, and it's a loving, dangerous star from a distance. Now, why dangerous? I will come to it later. So let us go back 45 years when I first started. My first day at work, I was 3,000 kilometers above sea level in Kodaikanal Solar Observatory, and I was looking at the sun for the first time, and I was operating something, I mean, you don't have to worry about the name, it's a device which will help us to look at different portions of the sun, and my job was a chowkidar's job. I have to look at every portion of the sun and report if there are any signs of activity, some kind of sparking, arcing, flaring, something like that. So I was doing that. All the time, I was not aware that 1974, which was the year which I was there for the first time, 1974 was the International Quiet Solar Year, which means the sun is not supposed to do much. So here I was happily waiting for something to happen and not knowing that that's a quiet year. But suddenly the sun was very kind. It gave a tremendous display of fireworks like this. I mean, something like this. The original one I don't have with me. But that's what happened. And that really fascinated me. And that night, when I slept, I dreamt that a forest fire had broken over the mountains of Kodaikanal. And then the fire appeared just like this prominence. So I was hooked. I was hooked to the sun and thought, okay, this is the thing I have to keep doing. Now, later on, most of us shifted from Kodaikanal to the headquarters at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics here in Bangalore. And I started doing my research work. And that's what they mentioned about discovering a new family of magnetic flux tubes. So don't worry about what it is. But what it did to me was, I was not satisfied with doing theoretical work. I wanted to actually build instruments and actually measure the solar magnetic fields. Now, I got a chance when I was able to go to Marshall Space Flight Center and to work with Dr. Mona Hagyard. And she had built a vector magnetograph. Now, don't worry about these terms. She had built an instrument that can measure the solar magnetic fields. And when she started building it, many pundits, they said it will not work. But it worked beautifully. And I was so inspired by her that I thought I will go back home to India and try to build a magnetograph myself. Now, this took a while because I was trying to work in the laboratory. But there was a chance when the government's Department of Science and Technology held a meeting. And they wanted to discuss big projects in astronomy. So there was a fight going on between the nighttime astronomers, the ones who watch the sky, the night sky, and the daytime astronomers, people like us, solar astronomers, and each of us wanted some big instrument. Now, I went on stage, and I told very naively, please don't fight. Let us both have a common telescope, which can look at both the sun and the stars. And then, again, some pundits, they started laughing. They laughed, and I had to go off the stage. Now, that hurt me a lot, because I knew that I was speaking sense. I was not a nut or anything. So I wanted to demonstrate this idea. I got a chance when I got a position as the director of the Udaipur Solar Observatory, which is under the Department of Space. And there was a invitation for proposals for the next 5-year plan. Immediately, that is myself and a bunch of very young, talented researchers, we put forward a proposal, and they said, okay, let's try this. But before that, there is the ISRO, Department of Space, has a culture of reviews. Everything has to be seen thoroughly. So in the review for this proposal, they were asking some very fundamental questions. First, they asked, why do you want this? I mean, you have already some kind of telescope. Why do you want this one, new one? So we said, yeah, it's old, and we need a state-of-the-art. Those are the catchwords. They said, okay, state-of-the-art and whatever. But now, what size, where do you want to put this telescope? So we said, right here in Udaipur, there's an island in the lake Fateh Sagar. So we want to put it there, where the old telescope is, and in the old building. So why we like the lake is because the air around the lake is is cooler, and so there is no shimmering. And so the images of the sun would appear more steady than if there was no water. So then there was the most embarrassing moment, because when the review was going on, you look out of the window of the boardroom or the other room, and you can see the lake, and the lake was not there. It was dry. This happens once in a while when there is no monsoon. And they said, you want to build it here? I said, yeah. We will use adaptive optics. It's a new thing, and it can compensate for the shimmering by doing online correction of the images. I said, okay. So have you built an adaptive optics system? They said, no, sir. Then, but they were professional. They said, okay, doesn't matter. Now we are giving you 2 jobs. One is to try and build a prototype adaptive optics system. And second is to check what size of the telescope will work optimally with the adaptive optics which you want to build. So we started the laboratory experiments. We did not know a thing about PID control. We were all scientists, hardly any engineer there. So we sat together, and somehow we built it. And it took 4 years for us, 4 long years of struggle, trial and error, and so many things. But we did demonstrate that we can build this system. And what was so difficult about this system was that we had to correct for the changing or the shimmering images once in a 100th of a second. So we had to take 1,000 pictures of the sun every second, and then do the computer things to compensate and correct it. So that was the challenge, and we did it. Okay. So now, in the meantime, we also did simulations, computer simulations, using some models of the turbulence of the Earth's atmosphere. And we tried to figure out what is the optimum size that can work with this adaptive optic system. Because if you have too large a size, then the things won't work, because the turbulence within that mirror diameter will be too much to compensate. And if you have too small a size, then there's no use to have an adaptive optic system, because it's already, the image is as good as it can be. So it's a kind of, you have to choose the optimum. So the computer simulations decided that this optimum size was 50 centimeter, half a meter, about this big. This big, yeah. So we said, okay, now we know the size. So while we were trying to build the adaptive optic system, we also found a vendor to make this solar telescope. And in those days, you may believe it or not, there were many people ready to make a nighttime telescope, but nobody wanted to make a solar telescope, because usually the small institutes or universities made them themselves. And we didn't have the group big enough to make a telescope all by ourselves. But we made a list of the specifications and finally found a vendor. The poor guy said, okay, we can do it. And they started on their job. And the telescope was nearing completion. So now we needed to find a way to install this telescope on the old building. So before that, we knew the weight of the telescope and everything. And we had tested the existing pier. There's a pillar on which the telescope stands. And we found it is okay for that weight. But then they introduced a new component in their design, which was very heavy, and it had to be rested on the surrounding building, wall of the building. So now the building was not so good as the pillar. And so we had to make a new building. Now the catch was, the High Court of Rajasthan had made a ban order for any construction in a buffer zone around the lake. You know, these things happen, like NGT tries to do, and they want to protect the lake shores from the rampant commercialization that was going on by the tourism industry. You know, they like to grab places and make good hotels on the shore of the lake. So now we didn't know what to do, but Professor U.R. Rao, who was the chairman of our governing council, he directly went to the chief minister of Rajasthan and said, this is the problem. And the chief minister, I was there with him, he just took the file and just said, okay, because he invoked what is called the rarest of the rare clause that is there in the High Court thing. And so the building was constructed, but then we had to install the telescope, and for that we needed to take a crane, big crane across the lake, and that was not possible. So we took small pieces of steel and other things using a small pontoon, and okay, these are examples of those. Okay. And we built what is called a gantry crane right over the telescope building, and then took these, after we built the crane, we took the telescope components again on a bigger platform, pontoon, and there was no big deal. We had to just have a rope tied from the island to the shore and to the pontoon, and just some people pulled the rope. So there was no rocket science involved here. And in this way, in a very low-tech manner, we could take the materials across, and then we could install it, putting each component down and then fixing it. And finally, the telescope was ready, and it looked a bit odd because it has an umbrella-like thing. And the light comes through the hole there, goes to the telescope, goes down, and then it gets analyzed. But the beauty was that this telescope could look at both the sun and the stars. So my dream was accomplished. So, so much for the laughing pundits. And some of them this took so long to make that some of them had passed on, had left this earth, so I could not show them this. Okay. Now, these are some of the stunning images that come out of this telescope. And don't worry about what these are, but just notice that these are of very good high-resolution pictures which compete with the best in the world. So there's no problem there. And okay, so we could also build a magnetograph finally to measure the solar magnetic fields. So now, what is this great fuss about magnetic fields? See, magnetic fields on the sun are carried around, are twisted around, they're knotted, they become stressed, and they burst. This is a cartoon of that thing. And they burst, send out material into the interplanetary space, which go along the solar wind, and they ram into the protective shield of the Earth's magnetic field. And sometimes when the two fields are of opposite direction, they can penetrate into the shield and cause harm, a lot of harm, to the satellites floating around, to power grids, to passengers in aircraft going along polar flights. There is they can also cause this beautiful aurorae. And these are many such things which can happen. So I finally found out that I had fallen in love with a dangerous star. So what can we do about it? All of us, the whole solar community in the world, is trying to understand, using these magnetic fields, how to predict these eruptions so that we can take some evasive action. For example, satellites can turn their solar sails parallel to the wind which is sending these particles, or airlines can avoid the polar flights and take other route, and so on. So these predictions will be very useful. And they are going to be tough, but one should not give up. People are all trying. And anyway, by the time this whole telescope was built, I too was at the end of my official career, and I had to superannuate and come back. But I came back with a happy feeling. And then now I'm happier that I got a chance to relate this experience to you. Before I stop, again, many people, the previous speakers had given takeaways. So again, the takeaways are very simple. Don't worry about pundits or experts. Just, if you are convinced, do what you want to do. And then you have to, of course, work very hard. You have to struggle a lot. And if you collect a team, as an earlier speaker has spoken, you can do it with fun. I mean, you can have a lot of fun, at the same time accomplish whatever you want to do. So these are the two takeaways I want to give you. So anybody who has a dream, again, this is the same theme going on in all these talks. Please pursue it without any fear. Thank you.